Well, it's the end of January. The Saints still have not made an offensive coordinator hire. The Senior Bowl is upon us, followed by the Super Bowl, and then we are well into the 2024 offseason. This is the Saints Insider for Wednesday, January the 31st. I'm Zach Ewing, joined by Rod Walker and Jeff Duncan today. Our erstwhile beat writers, Matthew Paris and Luke Johnson, are in Mobile for the Senior Bowl. So we got hot takes today, I think. It's just the hot take artists.
Yeah, and I think it's exactly. It's the columnist's job to kind of stir the pot. That's what we need to do today.
Even though I'm not in dress code with you all, y'all didn't tell me that we were wearing the blue.
Well, it's all right. We'll forgive you. We'll leave you around. Saints Insider is sponsored by Bank Plus. Their banking decisions are actually made here in New Orleans by local bankers who know the community and take the time to know you. From small business to big business, home loans to Bank Anywhere technology, Bank Plus is here for New Orleans. Learn more at bankplus.net. Lots to talk about today. We're going to talk some offensive coordinator hire, where the Saints are with that. Also, this is the first time we've recorded since the Atlanta Falcons and Carolina Panthers hired their head coaches. So our impressions of that. Michael Thomas logged back onto Twitter, had a few things to say. Might talk about that, and also get into some Senior Bowl stuff in the first, sort of the Saints' first look at some of these draft prospects for really what I think is going to be, outside of the offensive coordinator hire, the moment of their offseason. They don't have a lot of free agent dollars to spend. They've got to nail the draft.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, I made the mistake of kind of diving into the Twitter timeline yesterday. I usually try and stay above the fray, but
dangerous place.
Yeah, and got into some discussions with some fans about the lack of hitting on the most recent drafts. And I agree. I think we've talked about it. They haven't really had a really gonzo draft since 17. They've had some solid ones, gotten some starting caliber players, some role players, but they desperately need another. I mean, it's too much to ask to get a 2017 draft again or a 06 draft, but they've got to hit on some star power in this draft. And this is a good draft. Listen to talent evaluators around the league, Jeff Ireland. This is a much deeper draft than the past few drafts. So I do think there's an opportunity there.
And it'll be interesting to see, because they don't, like 2017, one thing, they had 2 first-round picks. I think they had 6 picks in the first 3 rounds. I mean,
correct.
They had capital that they don't have this year. And so it will be interesting to see if that sort of shapes the rest of their offseason. Do you try to trade some guys, get salary cap relief, and add a pick in what's a deep draft? So that it's all related, Rod.
Yeah, I think, just kind of repeating what Jeff said, but yeah, they just haven't done much in the draft at all. I mean, you got some guys, Paulson Adebo's, but he's done well. I'm trying to think of some guys since 2017 they really hit on. I think Brian Brzee has shown a lot of potential.
A.T. Perry for a 6th rounder, they may have found something there.
Yeah, but outside of that, I mean, it's just been, I wouldn't even say average. I mean, they just haven't really hit on a lot of guys. I think Kendre Miller showed a lot of potential toward the end of the season. The one, especially that last game, I mean, he showed what he can do. But yeah, they need to get it right. So what they find over in Mobile this weekend is going to be really important for this team.
Okay, that was a tangent I wasn't expecting at the beginning. I started it, so I'll take the blame. But we wanted to start with the offensive coordinator search. Kind of lots of movement around the league. Some of the Saints candidates have gone off the board. We'll talk about Raheem Morris going to Atlanta. He takes Zach Robinson with him as the offensive coordinator. So Robinson's off the board. Gerard Johnson decides to stay in Houston. He's off the board. At this point, Jeff, it feels like maybe the Saints are waiting on their 49ers candidates to finish their Super Bowl run. There's still a couple other names out there. They interviewed Luke Getsy, who was the Bears offensive coordinator, Brian Williams with the Eagles, Brian Johnson with the Eagles. A few other guys, Mike Sullivan's still out there. But the 49ers guys may be the dominoes we're waiting on.
Well, look, here's what I would say. This is the time of year where there's a lot of speculation, a lot of chatter out there. I don't think anybody knows what Mickey Loomis and Dennis Allen are thinking. So I think to see someone pull out and everyone to panic and say, oh, they lost that guy. I mean, we don't even know if that guy was offered or was a target.
Yeah.
I think it's really reckless to just speculate on a lot of that. Knowing how close to the vest they played this, and they're holding it close to the vest even in the building. There are people in the building who I talk to that don't have a clue which way they're leaning, and they would normally know things like that. So they understand how important this hire is, I think. They're wisely taking their time, which is the way Mickey Loomis operates. They understand this is a hugely important decision. And I think Mickey Loomis is leaning on kind of his expertise and being able to find sort of a diamond in the rough or a rising star. I mean, that's what Sean Payton basically was when he hired him. Kai Harley, no one had ever heard of Kai Harley when he got him out of the management council in New York. So I think he trusts his instincts and ability to identify talent. And I think he's leaving no stone unturned. And if that results in maybe a candidate moving on, that's fine. I think he feels confident that they're going to get somebody. So I don't think people need to quite panic. I understand why, but also don't think just because they interviewed somebody twice, that means that was the person they were going to hire. I don't think that's the case at all. And I don't know if it's the 49ers candidates or not. It certainly makes sense because of the playoffs, but also think they could pull a rabbit out of their hat and none of us would know. It wouldn't shock me at all.
And when Mickey talked, at the end of the season, I mean, that was one of the things he said. They were going to be really methodical with this and they were going to take the time with it. So, I don't think it's a reason to panic. But, I mean, I do understand, like, why fans are panicking because they see all these other teams getting their guy or, these guys saying, nah, I'm going to stay put. So, I do understand why people are concerned about it. But, again, I just think this is kind of what Mickey said he was going to do, and this is how it's kind of playing out.
Well, people are concerned because of the state of the franchise in general, right? And so they know they need to hit this higher. The Saints know they need to hit on this higher. And so, there's a level of concern, but specifically about how long it's taking, and we'll get into maybe when the search will end. I don't know that there's still, I think, 10 or 11 teams that need offensive coordinators. I mean, and a couple more that need defensive coordinators. It's not out of the ordinary that you'd be in that situation. But let's talk about who's left that we know the Saints have interviewed. And like you say, Jeff, maybe there's even other candidates we don't know, but who we know they've interviewed who has not taken a coordinator job somewhere else. And these are the names. We got Brian Griese and Clint Kubiak from the 49ers. We have Luke Getsy, who was the Bears OC, and before that was in Green Bay, correct. I believe. Yeah.
He was a Green Bay guy.
We have Greg Lewis, who was the Ravens wide receivers coach.
Yep.
Okay. Trying to remember all these. So Ronald Curry, Saints quarterbacks coach. Mike Sullivan, the Steelers kind of interim play caller at the end of the year. And then Brian Johnson, who is the Eagles wide receivers coach.
Who got fired after one season.
Right. So those are the, 7 names we have right now who we know the Saints have interviewed. So we know there's some level of interest. And they have not taken a job elsewhere. Could there be other candidates? Could John Gruden still be in there yet? I mean, there's other names, but those are the guys we know about. And it's kind of, it was all McVay, Shanahan guys. This is a pretty good mix of guys now.
Yeah, I think the two that a lot of people talking about are the two 49ers guys. Obviously, they're preparing for the Super Bowl, but both Clint Kubiak and Brian Griese make sense for a lot of reasons, connections. Kubiak, of course, is the son of Gary Kubiak, who I know the Saints had interest in a year ago as the offensive coordinator. He's a former Texas A&M guy, just like Dennis Allen. Gerard Johnson was a Texas A&M guy, so there's familiarity with those guys in that tree. And then Brian Griese, I don't think people are quite familiar with his background, but I mean he's a John Gruden guy. He played 2 different stints under John Gruden with the Bucs. Back then, Kyle Shanahan was an understudy of John Gruden with the Bucs. He was on the staff then. So that tree makes a lot of sense. There's connection with the Raiders in those days. So there would be a very seamless transition. But there's a risk in both those guys. And one of the things I think that's interesting about the search right now is we talk about how critical this season is for Dennis Allen. I mean, he has to win. I would even argue he probably has to make the playoffs, or it's going to be over for him after 3 seasons. So is he willing to take a risk on a unproven commodity? I mean, a lot of these people they're interviewing have never been a coordinator or never called plays. Gerard Johnson in particular, he was a assistant quarterbacks coach like a year ago, in Minnesota. So he hadn't even been a full-time position coach until a year ago. So, you can catch a rising star. I would compare him a lot to, say, a Joe Brady when he left New Orleans and went to LSU. And they took a chance on Joe Brady, and it paid off. but there's risk there. And I just wonder, knowing how Mickey Loomis and Dennis Allen operate, we see how conservative he can be at times in play calling and the way he manages a game. Is he willing to roll the dice on someone that's got his career on the line? I think that's what's fascinating about this. Does he revert back to someone that's maybe a little more proven, like a Getsky or a Johnson, that's called plays before? So that's fascinating to me. If he were to roll the dice on either of the 49ers guys, knowing that they've never been the man.
I think that for me, there'd be some concerns about hiring two guys that just got fired when you talk about Getsy and Brian Johnson. Mike Sullivan, I looked at some of his stuff, obviously. But
Steelers fan.
Yeah, he's a guy that he actually he was a coordinator with the Giants like years back for like 2 years. I mean, he does have some experience as a coordinator. It may have just been an interim, but I mean, he was the actual coordinator for them. And so, I mean, he's a guy that has some experience, but I mean, I don't know if he has enough that's going to make the Saints want to make a move on him. So, yeah, I don't think, to me, the list of candidates outside of the 49ers guys, I mean, I don't think it's great. I do think Ronald Curry is a guy that, if you're going to hire Ronald Curry, you may could have just done it and say, look, we're going to move Ronald Curry up to coordinator when you let Pete Carmichael go, but they didn't. So, but I think he's a guy that you can kind of always fall back on if you have to.
Yeah, I mean, if you do a series of interviews and come back to Ronald Curry, then that confirms you really liked Ronald Curry, I guess. But I don't know. Clint Kubiak also did call plays briefly for the Vikings.
Correct.
In an interim basis.
1 year he called plays. Pretty mediocre year. I think it was the year under Mike Zimmer, and I think they got fired after that. So, I don't know if he's probably the most experienced. Brian Griese, of course, never called plays. I mean, he's only been a coach for 1 year, so he's another roll of the dice. But that might be where they're at right now. I mean, look, we've talked about this before. Coaches know the landscape of the NFL. They know Dennis Allen is in a make or break season. Do you want to roll the dice on that and take a risk with your career? I think they're going to have to get somebody like a Brian Griese or someone that really has nothing to lose by going here, as opposed to an established coach or a rising star. They're not going to get that coach, and that's just the reality of where they're at. This isn't the Sean Payton, Drew Brees era Saints when they could pluck top assistant coaches, get a Dan Campbell in there to be a tight ends coach. I mean, Dan Campbell was a head coach for a while for the Miami Dolphins. He became a tight end coach here. That's the difference in where this franchise is at right now, and that's the reality of it. So they're probably not going to get a Joe Brady type that's a hot commodity in the league. It's just not going to – no one's going to put their career on the line to come here and potentially be looking for a job a year from now.
Yeah, if I had to handicap it, I'd say those 49ers guys are probably your leaders in the clubhouse right now, but nobody's like an odds-on favorite. I mean, there's nobody who, they're just waiting on him, and that's who the guy's going to be. Because as you said, Jeff, they're playing this close to the vest, and I think that's good. They should. It's that important because they have to get it right.
Well, yeah, and look, if you're Zach Robinson, are you going to come here and be out of a job in a year, or are you going to go with Raheem Morris, who's going to have a long leash, long rope, long runway, whatever you want to call it, in Atlanta, and a guy that's got your back? I mean, he's worked with him for a number of years. He's got a bunch of young stars on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, I totally get why he's going to go there. He's going to have at least probably a 2 to 3 year runway there. So it just makes perfect sense. If you're Gerard Johnson, and we don't even know if he even got offered, but if you're him, he may even also, I remember Zach Strief saying he was hesitant. People don't know this, but he was hesitant about going to Denver to take the offensive line job with Sean Payton because he didn't know if he was ready. He said, look, I've only been an assistant offensive line coach 1 or 2 years. I'm not sure I'm ready for that responsibility. He had the self-awareness. Gerard Johnson may know that. He may say, you know what, I'm better off being here behind Bobby Slowick, guy I learned from, get another year. I'm going to be a hot commodity wherever I go and invest there. He's a Houston guy, too.
Well, and maybe that's why Gerard Johnson said he's going to stay under Bobby Slowick. I mean, you look at, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, but there's sort of this trend now of guys staying, and Gerard Johnson, if he wants to be an offensive coordinator, if Bobby Slowick becomes a head coach next year, Gerard Johnson may become an offensive coordinator for that team.
And he knows that.
So,
and the Texans know that. So there's much more security there in your future. So all these things make sense. And it's smart for him to go on the interview process and to go through it. Jeff Ireland talked about that in Mobile. I mean, going through the process of these interviews is valuable experience. So I don't think people need to panic because Gerard Johnson, we don't even know if he was a target at all. But I've just seen a lot of chatter out there, and I think it's just speculation right now.
Just kind of expounding on that, though. I mean, there are some other positions. You look at that Tennessee job, first-year coach. Raiders, first-year coach. So, I mean, there are some positions out there that, and I'm talking about head coaches, that are probably a little bit more appealing to offensive coordinators than this job. Because, I mean, these guys are, like Jeff said, I mean, they have coaches that are going to, they're going to be there for a while. With Dennis Allen, you just don't know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you look at that Tennessee job, the Raiders job, the Chargers job, all those are first-year head coaches.
Well, one guy who probably would not care about that, and I don't know if he's a serious candidate, so I'll just ask you guys, do you still think he's a serious candidate, is John Gruden?
No, I've never thought he was a candidate at all. I've never thought I think I wrote he was going to be looked at as an offensive assistant, like kind of what Pete Carmichael is going to do in Denver. That's the exact role that he would be looked at, and that's because the Saints know John Gruden's not going to be here long, so they're not going to put their offense in charge of with a guy that could leave in a year or two for a bigger job. So I think the way they looked at him is like, and he would make sense if, say, Brian Griese came in because of their connections. But I don't think he's ever been an offensive coordinator candidate, and I don't think we've ever, at least I haven't written that. I said he would be kind of an extra part on the offensive staff.
If you're a candidate, do you want that, though? Do you want this other guy with such a strong personality? Do you want to work with him, or you just kind of want to come in and kind of be the guy?
Yeah, and maybe it has to be a guy like Griese who has previous connections to
Correct,
be okay with that. That would be the difference there.
Yeah, if you're Ronald Curry, he'd have to sign off on that.
Right.
And they would empower the offensive coordinator. That's why they haven't hired any of these other offensive assistants. I mean, they're waiting on the coordinator to bring in his own people.
Okay, so let's talk timeline, because I think we've agreed it's not like they're taking too long or anything. But how long is too long, and when do you expect this to happen?
But the offensive coordinator?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I don't think there's anything pressing right now at all, except once you get Jeff Ireland alluded to this, and I know we're going to talk about this, but it does affect their personnel evaluations. But right now, they're still in the process, personnel department for the draft is what I mean, and free agency. I think as long as they can get somebody hired in the next 2 or 3 weeks in preparation for the start of the league year when free agency starts, then you can start identifying players that fit your system, players that might have familiarity with what you do. And that's the most fascinating thing to me. I've talked about this all along is, are they going to go to a completely new offensive scheme that requires different skill sets and strengths? Jeff Ireland talked about this at the Senior Bowl. They've run a zone run scheme for a long time here that requires a different skill set in the offensive line than maybe if they go to a gap scheme or to a man scheme. That will affect their player procurement phase of their offseason. So they've got to get that done in the next few weeks. But I think it's more important to get the right person. And if that involves waiting till the Super Bowl is over, so be it.
And I do think it'll be after. I mean, Super Bowl's February the 11th. So,
Correct.
I mean, I'd expect them to make a move in the next 4 or 5 days after that. I don't think they're going to just let it linger on too long after that.
And that leaves a couple of weeks to hire position coaches, get everyone settled, all that sort of stuff, do some evaluations. And the start of the league year is not until March
17th or something.
Yeah, March 15th, 17th, something like that. So you've got a whole month at that point. Still plenty of time. And I don't, I mean, I know everyone wants to know who it is. There's no rush right now.
Not at all. And look, I do think it's important to get the person in. And who knows what's going on behind closed doors? I mean, we have no idea. I mean, for all we know, Kubiak or Griese, if that was who it is, they may have already privately
Handshake
accepted
agreement.
the job. Yeah. And they may have already talked to who's going to be their offensive line or running backs coach or whatever, and it's all taken care of. And just everyone's anxious, but behind closed doors, it's already the mechanizations are in progress.
I do think Kubiak's the only guy that the fan, and I know you don't make this hire for the fans, but I think Kubiak's the one guy that fans are going to, they'd be pretty excited about probably. And maybe Griese, but I mean, he just doesn't have as much experience. But those other guys, I just don't know if they're going to really move the needle.
You hire Luke Getsy after the Bears fired him, and he was a pro. Like, you're right.
Yeah, another guy, I think, and if, look, the Niners, the success they've had, you're getting somebody from the Shanahan tree, but it's really a Shanahan Gruden tree. So, like, I think all that makes a lot of sense with with Derek Carr being your quarterback. Again, we don't know how long Derek Carr is going to be here, and we don't know what Kubiak's or Greasy, what their thoughts are on the quarterback position. There's so much to know, and that's part of the interview process that I'm sure Allen and Loomis are going through with these guys.
All right, let's move the discussion on to what the rest of the NFC South is doing. But first, I want to let you know the Saints Insider Podcast is brought to you by Bank Plus. We appreciate you subscribing to the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. Sign up for notifications for all our videos. It's free, doesn't cost you a dime. Also, hit the like button for us and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Here with Rod Walker and Jeff Duncan, I'm Zach Ewing. NFC South, Atlanta Falcons interviewed. I mean, you want to talk about interviewing a lot of guys. They interviewed, I think, 11 candidates for head coaches, including Bill Belichick, including Mike Vrabel, including Jim Harbaugh.
Bill Belichick twice.
Yeah, they settle on Raheem Morris, who's no stranger to the NFC South. He coached 3 years with the Buccaneers. 2 of them were bad. I think he was 3-13 and 4-12. The one in the middle, he was like 10-6, but they missed the playoffs. And then he had an interim stint with the Falcons when Dan Quinn was fired, and he went 4-7. So he's not had a lot of success as a head coach. In some ways, his history is similar to that of Dennis Allen, where as a head coach, he has not had success. As a defensive coordinator, he's had a lot of success, won a Super Bowl with the Rams a couple of years ago. He is the Falcons' hire. He brings Zach Robinson with him. What do you guys think of
I love it. I think it's a great hire. I mean, everybody you talk to in the NFL, anybody around the league, he has tremendous respect across the board. I think there's something to be said about getting a coach and that maybe learn from the mistakes. In Tampa, in that period when he was there, that was a rough period. He's going to have a lot more resources in Atlanta. I think he's off to a great start hiring Zach Robinson, who's well thought of. I think they're going to be a force. I've said that all along. They've got to figure out the quarterback. I think they will. Zach Robinson will definitely be in charge of trying to find a quarterback to fit that system. But Raheem Morris, I know it sounds like a retread, but I don't think his circumstances indicate his quality. Just people around the league. Sean McVay speaks so highly of him. I think it's an A hire.
Hearing Jeff talk about Raheem sounds a lot like the same stuff we were saying about Dennis Allen. We talked about the organization that he coached at previously and didn't succeed. And, I mean, what Jeff was saying about the Bucs then is kind of what we said about the Raiders when Dennis Allen was there. But, yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised when he made the hire. I just didn't see him going that direction. I mean, when you hear somebody talk to Bill Belichick, you just kind of think, okay, that's probably what they're going to go after. But I do think the fact that he's been with the Rams and he's brought his coordinator in, with Zach Robinson, I think they have a chance to be really good. I thought this was a team that was, on paper, probably the best team in the division if they had a quarterback. I mean, like Jeff said, they have to fix that. But that's a team that I think they're probably a little closer to being good than I think the Saints are right now. I think the Falcons are in a better situation right now.
I think if you look at just the next 5 years, the Falcons may be in the best position of anybody in the division.
Yeah.
The Bucs are a little bit older. They have some salary cap issues. I think ESPN had its list of the top 50 free agents, and I was 5 of them are Bucs. That's a big percentage, and that doesn't mean those guys are gone, but I do think, the Panthers are a mess, and we should talk about them too. They take Dave Canales, the Bucs offensive coordinator, as a head coach. That was a little surprising too. How much of that do y'all think is the Panthers? We talk about there's only 32 of these jobs and everybody wants one. Maybe not everybody wanted to work for Dave Tepper in Carolina. I don't know. Did they have to go down the list a little bit and find a younger guy in Dave Canales?
I think so. I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, take a young guy. They're looking at a pretty long rebuild, I think. I don't think that thing's going to get turned around overnight. So you get a young guy you think has potential like Canales, and you give him some support and ride it out. I don't think you go the route of Frank Reich. That didn't work.
Right.
So I think it makes sense organizationally what they're doing. Dan Morgan being hired as the GM, guy that played there, is kind of beloved in that community. That makes a lot of sense. But I'm with Rod. I mean, if I had to stack the teams right now, I mean, I think Atlanta's number one. I think Tampa, frankly, is probably number two. I mean, they were able to execute last year what the Saints have been trying to do, which was do an organizational reset, but yet remain competitive. And they end up winning the division, winning the playoff game, and they were able to clear out a lot of cap space. I mean, they're in really good shape. And so I think the Saints have to be a number 3 right now, and then I think Carolina's a distant 4th.
And I think what you saw what Canales do with Baker Mayfield, I mean, I thought Baker had,
And Geno Smith the year before that in Seattle. Yeah.
So, I mean, Carolina obviously needs somebody to get Bryce Young where he needs to be. I mean, they used a number 1 pick on him last year, so I think they're banking on Canales being able to do that. And if he can, I mean, obviously they got to put a lot of pieces around him. I mean, that team needs some help, but if they can do that, I mean, they could be a contender.
We talked about this. I mean, the NFC, just look at the NFC landscape right now. Who's the young rising star quarterback? I mean, Bryce Young was thought to be that. I mean, there's really, I can't think of any.
In NFC?
I mean, Brock Purdy
would be.
Brock Purdy. Right. So that's what I'm saying. If you're Carolina, you can put some pieces around him. You've got something there. And I think that's what everybody has to be thinking in the NFC. I mean, the AFC is stacked with elite quarterbacks. The NFC is kind of wide open. I mean, we got the Jared Goffs and Matthew Stafford.
Well, the other guy you'd mention after this year would be Jordan Love.
Correct.
In Green Bay.
Yeah, definitely.
Correct. And that's about it, though. So it's kind of there for the taking. I think this draft with the quarterback talent and some elite quarterback prospects, it'll be interesting to see if people make a move, what Chicago does at the top. Are they going to stick with Justin Fields? Are they going to trade out of that? Does that open it up for another team to go, what if Atlanta gets crazy bold and goes after one of those guys and sells the ranch to get up there? I mean, there's just so much in play this year. And I think the NFC, even if you're the Saints, you can look at it and say, I don't think there's anybody other than the Niners that you think you can't, in one offseason, get up to at least compete with. I guess the Lions.
Detroit, I would say.
Those two.
Man, if the Falcons end up with Justin Fields, that's like nightmare fuel for Saints fans, right? I mean, just watching that guy run for 150 yards on you twice a year every year, he's exactly what you don't want. But we'll see what the Bears do. I mean, the Falcons may be in that market. Well, they will be in that market beyond, that kind of falls after what the Bears decide to do.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the Cowboys are still going to be competitive,
Sure.
Obviously, Dak Prescott. But I do think the NFC is fascinating right now. And I think Atlanta and Carolina went the young route with their coaching hires. And it makes sense, but there's reason to also have doubt. They're both unproven commodities to this point. So the division, I think, is still pretty wide open.
All right. Speaking of sort of macro level views of stuff, we touched on this earlier, but Bobby Slowick staying in Houston, along with Gerard Johnson. The big surprise, I think, this week was Ben Johnson, after the Lions are eliminated, decides not to take the Washington Commanders head coaching job, which everyone sort of assumed he was. That's who they were waiting on. He says, "No, I'm staying in Detroit. Want to win a Super Bowl ring." It's an interesting trend because we do always talk about how precious these jobs are and how guys will jump at the chance to be a head coach. We maybe are seeing that change to where now they're waiting for the right opportunity. And by the way, there's a team here on Airline Drive that may or may not have an opportunity in a year and may be looking at some of these guys to be a head coach. So is this a sea change? Is this a one-off situation with just a couple of guys who like their situations? How do you guys take this?
No, I mean, Sean Payton did that. I mean, Sean Payton was with the Cowboys and got offered the Raiders job and turned it down, and a year later took the Saints job. I mean, that's gone on for years in the league. And you want to get in a spot where you can be successful. And I'm not saying, but there's also, I think, some rumors and I don't know, speculation about how much he was asking for. He was asking apparently for a lot of money for a guy that hasn't done anything yet. So that's the market. I mean, the head coaching market's blown up as far as salaries, and that's really Bill Belichick and Sean Payton. They took it to a whole nother level, and so I think he might have scared some teams off. But I also think it's smart. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt Detroit's going to be successful next year. You never know. Injuries, things like that happen, but they have a foundation in place with a lot of young talent. I mean, a couple of good drafts. So he would probably be at the top of the pecking order next year when jobs open.
And he was in the top. I mean, he was one of the coaches even last year. I mean, he interviewed for the Colts job and the Texans job and kind of like pulled back and decided, he didn't want those either. So, I mean, obviously he's as hot of a commodity now as anybody in the league. I mean, he was the guy that everybody wanted and thought he'd get the next job. And, we need Matt Parrish here to kind of tell us about the Washington job and how bad of a job it is. But, yeah, I think the Seattle job's a good
great job.
That's a
Yeah,
good
the other
job,
job
but-
that hasn't been filled
Yeah.
yet.
Resources,
Yeah.
you know that I mean, and look, Washington's a different job now with different ownership
right.
than it was before. I think. I mean, it would be more attractive, so that's why it is somewhat surprising,
Right.
Because it's not the old Washington organization. You got a deep-pocketed owner that's changing the culture there, and new GM. So there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic. Makes it a little surprising. Maybe the quarterback situation's a little dicey there.
Yeah.
But that's a team also that I could see being in. Obviously, they're going to be in a quarterback market.
And the
this-
third pick?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
so
third
the-
pick. I mean, and you got Drake May, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels. We know about Michael Penix. I mean, there's some talented quarterbacks. I heard our boy Penix is lighting it up at his All-Star game. So some wild throws that Rod and I, in the press box at the Superdome, were like, "What is this?"
He was dropping some balls
Dropped
in
some
buckets,
dimes,
man.
We
Yeah.
sit in the, and I'll just say this: we sit in the exact same area of the press box, so we get the same angle. We didn't see throws like that all year
yeah,
from the Saints.
Or any NFL quarterback, right?
And
Like,
very
I mean,
few
yeah.
guys dropping dimes like that.
Yeah. And you talk about those Houston, the two, Slovic and
Draw
and
Johnson.
Gerard
Yeah.
Johnson. Yeah, I mean, that just tells you how good C.J. Stroud was. I mean, this guy's so good that hey, we're gonna ride this thing out a little bit and see what this can be. And here, I mean, obviously the quarterback situation here is a lot less stable. So I get it.
Yeah, it's super interesting, and we'll see if maybe the Saints enter that market next year. Maybe they don't. A lot of it's going to depend on how they do with this offensive coordinator hire and the rest of the offseason. You mentioned Sean Payton, Jeff. Sean Payton, the other bit of news this week, takes Pete Carmichael back in under his wing as an offensive analyst. You mentioned that. And then also the Saints assistant scouting director, Cody Razier. And that kind of, like, just listen to Jeff Ireland talk about it in Mobile yesterday, maybe ruffled some feathers around the Saints that they lost that guy. I don't know. Assistant scouting directors, it's not like you can't find somebody to replace that, but they're starting to get a little bit rankled by Payton, I think.
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair point. I mean, I think they feel like, I think it goes back to when Sean left and negotiated with Mickey Loomis about how this was all going to go down. It's been very amicable, but they even had conversations like, look, we want this to be amicable. We don't want you coming in raiding. So there was conversations about that. But knowing Payton, I mean, all's fair in love and war with that guy. And so he's going to try and get as many talented people as he can. That's how he's always operated. And Cody's very well thought of. I mean, I know people in the building, he's revered, not only as a scout, but as just a person. I mean, he's very well thought of. I think the interesting thing is usually personnel executives, their contracts run through the draft. That's when they are expired, and that's when they start. So it's interesting, and I think it speaks to a little bit of the acrimony that basically they said, you're out of here. We don't want you. If you're leaving to go to Denver, you might as well leave now. And so he basically started working at the Senior Bowl for the Broncos. That's unusual. That doesn't happen very often. Usually you would make that change after the draft. So there might be something there, and no one's told me this, but I could see that. I mean, there had to be some conversation that went on.
Yeah.
And, that could maybe ruffle some feathers. But the Pete Carmichael thing, I think you could see the way Jeff Ireland answered that. I mean, I think people are happy for Carmichael and understand that was kind of a fait accompli.
I think if there is some bitterness, I mean, you understand losing a coach and you can just kind of replace him with a coach. But when you're losing a guy who's basically been spending the past few months scouting players that you're trying to get for the future, I mean, that's all of a sudden gone. And now so I mean, I get why.
All that information, all that intellectual
That's
property goes with him.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, and look, Jeff Ireland, he was a Jeff Ireland protege, worked under Jeff in Miami, very well regarded. But I think it speaks to what Rod's saying. I mean, this is a guy that's been working for the Saints, gathering intel, and now he's out the door. But again, it's Sean Payton. It's the way he rolls, man. I mean, he does not care about protocol. I mean, they know that. I mean, they know that, and they loved it when he was on their team. But now that he's not with them, it ruffles feathers. I mean, it's just how the guy rolls. I mean, this is what he did when he was head coach here, and people loved it. And that's what you get with Sean Payton. He's the guy going to do the choke sign on the sideline at the Falcons, and you loved it when he was your coach, and then you hate it when he's not your coach.
And the Broncos, I was looking at the draft. I mean, they picked like 2 ahead of the Saints. So, I mean,
man.
it's just like.
But by the way, the Broncos also come to the Superdome this year. So when the schedule comes out, circle that one. That'll be
That'll be
interesting.
a Monday night game, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
Or Thursday night or something.
I would think,
you got to
yeah.
put it in prime time.
Yeah, that's got to be. Look, I know this. I mean, I happened to be talking to Payton a couple weeks ago for that NOLA no-call thing, and he's going to be in town. He's coming in town for Mardi Gras, so you might see him on the parade route.
All right. Saints Insider Podcast. We are moving forward. Friday, I think we're going to have Luke and Matt back from Mobile, and they're going to talk what they saw at the Senior Bowl, what they heard at the Senior Bowl, and we'll kind of get into the first sort of draft evaluations and maybe some of the decisions the Saints are going to have to make player personnel-wise. One of them is on Michael Thomas, who got back on Twitter, on X.
Shocking.
On Sunday, Conference Championship Sunday, and kind of took some Saints fans' attention away from the AFC Championship game because right before it, he was tweeting about how, among other things, he said that he would have had 1,000 yards this year if he had not been set up by a bad ball. Talking about Derek Carr throwing a ball, I guess, a little low, and he got hit, or maybe it was a little high, and he had to go up, and he gets hit low in Minnesota. He called out the man sitting to my left right here, Jeff Duncan, who sort of unwittingly you've become like Michael Thomas, public enemy number one. I don't know. It's just, I don't know, Rod, we'll start with you. It's like, I think if we all thought there was a pretty good chance he was going to be gone when the season ended, now it seems like a pretty great chance.
Yeah, and it seems like he knows that he wants to be, it almost sounds like he wants to be gone. And because I don't think you do that knowing that Derek Carr is going to be back, and you don't put that out there if you plan to play with this guy unless they have some kind of understanding. All right, we're just going to put this out there and get people. I don't know. So yeah, I'd be shocked if he was back with his team next season, and that may be best for him and best for the franchise.
And look, I think it's understandable. I mean, Mike came back here and signed a team-friendly deal that was incentive-laden, so he needed a big year, performance-wise on the field, not only to gain some of those incentives, but also to, make him attractive to another team or to the Saints to re-sign. So this was a big year for him, and he knew that, and he needed to stay healthy, and he was healthy. And then he gets this unfortunate injury, and it undermines all the things he was trying to accomplish this year. So you can get why he would be frustrated. He was all in on the Derek Carr signing. I mean, I think Mike, at least my understanding was, there was an opportunity for him to survey the landscape last year for a trade. And I think once he saw Derek Carr and they'd gone out and gotten a proven commodity, he said, well, this might be my best option. And it didn't work out in any way. So I'm sure he's frustrated at this point of his career with all the money that he had a chance to earn. And not only that, but his legacy. I mean, this was a guy that was on a trajectory to be a Hall of Fame receiver. I mean, he was putting up numbers that we haven't ever seen
NFL
before.
records, yeah.
Yeah, setting NFL records. And it's just been derailed by injuries and unfortunate circumstances. So I'm sure he's upset about all that, and he's using that outlet, which I'm sure he sometimes probably regrets, maybe not. But I get why he's frustrated, and I agree with Rod. I don't see how they could bring him back in the building. Matter of fact, from what I understand is, that kind of was the message when they put him on IR, is basically like, that's it, we're moving on.
Yeah. I mean, there was some revisionist history with some of the stuff. There was something about how he didn't get targeted after he called out Carr for missing A.T. Perry on a play. Well, he was never even playing after he called out Carr for the A.T. Perry ball. So there was a reference to that, and there was, the whole thing with the story you wrote preseason, Jeff, and I think if people go back and read it, all you said was, don't expect this to be all-pro Hall of Famer Michael Thomas. He's older and he's injury prone and all those sorts of things. I didn't take it as bashing, but apparently he did.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't see anything he wrote, but I mean, I think people have to understand, like, Mike Thomas is still a capable player, especially the way he plays, his style of play. He's a physical guy. He catches everything in sight. He competes like hell. I mean, there's a role for him for a team. But some of the off-the-field stuff, that's what's causing some of these issues, because he's not all-pro Mike Thomas anymore. So when you get to that point, you become expendable if you're going to be what I would term, and this might be not a fair term, but kind of high maintenance. If you're going to be high maintenance, you've got to excel on the field. And when he's had all these injuries, it undermines that a little bit. So, but I do think Mike can play in the league, and I think he proved that this year. He was valuable as a complementary piece to Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed and the tight ends, and I think that's exactly the role that I laid out in the preseason. He doesn't get off the line like he used to. He doesn't run like he used to. I mean, the analytics, just look at the numbers. He's among the lowest in the league in yards after catch. He's among the lowest in the league in separation, all the things. But that's not his game anyway. It's never been his game. So if you're going to do that, that kind of stuff, you got to produce on the field.
Yeah. All right, we'll end here with just a little teaser for Friday's show. As I mentioned, we'll talk a lot of Senior Bowl on Friday. Jeff Ireland did speak in Mobile yesterday, asked a lot of sort of variety of questions. One of the things he was asked about was prospects, obviously, and he mentioned it's a great draft for quarterbacks, but also, Rod, for offensive and defensive linemen. I'm of the opinion, and I know everybody wants a new quarterback in the building and to look at the future and everything. I think with as few draft picks as the Saints have early in this draft, I don't think you can use one on a quarterback. That's my opinion. I think it's got to be a lineman.
Yeah, and I kind of lean towards the offensive line just because, I mean, unless you think Trevor Penning is going to become what they thought he was going to be, I mean, I think you got to add some depth to that offensive line. We don't know what Andrews Pete's situation is as far as, his contract. But, I think they have to start up front and on either side. But personally, I would start with the offensive line. If there's a defensive line that they really like, I mean, go for it. But they need help on both sides of the line. And I think the team's pretty solid everywhere else. I don't think they need to just really. I mean, I think the receivers are good. I think the tight end room is solid. I think the secondary is solid. Maybe a linebacker, but I mean, I think offensive line and defensive line are where it starts for this team.
Jeff, you agree with that?
Yeah, look, and I think their cap situation kind of hamstrung. They're hamstrung by it going in free agency. Ideally, you'd like to be able to address those positions. I know the way the Saints have always operated. They kind of want to fill their roster leading to the draft where they have no holes, and then they can just take the old best player available. And I think that's been a very successful philosophy. You're not pigeonholed into taking a player, or a position because of a need. And I'm not sure how well they can do that this year because if you're looking at tackle, I mean, that's an elite position. Free agent tackles do not come cheap, and they don't really have that luxury, I don't think. But we've said that before, and they've somehow magically pulled a rabbit out of their hat cap-wise. But I think that's, to me, tackle, not only because of the uncertainty of Trevor Penning and Andres Pete, but also there's uncertainty with Ryan Ramczyk. And even if he comes back this year, what's the long-term situation with him? I mean, he's playing with a chronic knee injury, and he's gutting it out, but I think that's got to be the top priority. And then I think another pass rusher. But we don't know internally how they feel about Payton Turner and or Isaiah Foskey. Do they really like them? I mean, sometimes these guys can blossom. You just don't know. I mean, I brought this up a bunch of times. Nobody wants to hear it right now, but Cam Jordan had 1 sack his rookie year. 1. And he's a Hall of Fame player now. So, you just don't know.
And they probably know more about how injured Cam Jordan was this year. They may know more than we do about, what are the possibility of him bouncing back and becoming a productive Pro Bowl type player again, too. So.
Yeah. And look, I actually think I may be in the minority here, but I think this team could use another receiver. I think I'm not sure Chris Olave is a true number 1 receiver, if we use that phrase. I think he would be a terrific 2. But now you're talking about trying to get somebody up in the top 10 of the draft.
Well,
which is, so I think if somebody fell that you really liked, I think you could pull the trigger on that.
Yeah. I think you look at mock drafts now, and we'll certainly get into this over the next 3 months, but quarterbacks and wide receivers are going to be hot commodities in the top 10. But that could work in the Saints' favor. That could mean that the top linemen are still around when you get into the teens where they're going to be starting to pick at 14. So we'll see. Lots to talk about. Matt and Luke will be back from Mobile. We'll talk to them on Friday. And I think that's going to do it for us today. We appreciate all of you tuning in. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the like button. Comment for us below who you think the Saints should target in the draft or at offensive coordinator, or your thoughts on Michael Thomas or anything else. And we will see you on Friday. For our producer, Norman Bell, he's Rod Walker, Jeff Duncan. I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching Saints Insider.